So in today's video, we are going to be discussing the NFL changing their overtime rule. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So the NFL changed their overtime rule, guaranteeing both teams a possession in overtime, but the rule only pertains to the postseason. Now, obviously, that's kind of a weird thing for the NFL to do and kind of unprecedented. It kind of feels like when the NFL wants to do something with a rule change, they will kind of test it out, in the Pro Bowl and the preseason. Now, obviously, with overtime, you're not really going to test that in the preseason. That's kind of silly to do. But you would think that they would have this rule in both the regular season and the postseason, because a rule of this magnitude that is going to dramatically change the way that games are played in the NFL, you would kind of think that they would want to have it, all the kinks worked out, see fully how this rule is going to work. And I know on paper, I know we can run it through our heads like, hey, this is how it's going to work. Both teams are going to get the ball. We know how it's going to work. But you would think they would want it in the regular season too, to test it out, to make sure that they fully know what rule they're getting. Because then if it doesn't work this year, like the NFL, like the pass interference replay, they kind of got rid of that after a year. So they would maybe consider getting rid of it. Now this rule is going to be permanent. They're not going to get rid of it. And I'm not going to lie, personally, as a Chiefs fan, but also because I've had 4 years to sit on this rule, I'm not a huge fan of it. For the obvious reason is you're kind of eliminating an entire aspect of a team. Teams spend money on defense. You look at the Saints, you look at, the Dolphins defense last year, you look at Tampa Bay's defense, you look at teams that actively invest in having a good defense. But now it's all kind of pointless. It's all pointless. These rules here, knowing that all you have to do, because these rules in the NFL, what they've been doing for years, they've been promoting offense. They want higher scoring games. They want the games to be more exciting for fans, which I completely understand. And I'm not here to be, a traditionalist or just be, stuck in the old ways. But there is something exciting about a good and great defensive play. I think we all can agree with that. There's some things that are great about a defense making a huge stop when it matters. Like you look at 1 yard short for the Tennessee Titans in the Super Bowl. Like that 1 yard, that defensive stop was amazing. Like you look at the Patriots and then picking off the Seahawks at the 1 yard line when they should have ran it, all that, like, exciting defense. It's very exciting when a defense can step up and make plays. But the NFL over the years have just kind of taken defenses out of games. Like they've made it so soft for the quarterbacks. They've made it to where you can barely touch receivers. They've changed it to where offenses completely run the NFL. And if you look at this rule now, you can kind of see that the NFL wants even more offense, because now there's actively, because once you're deep into the playoffs and hey, if all we have to do, get it to overtime, we're both guaranteed a shot in overtime. It almost feels like you don't have to invest in a defense anymore. And it just also feels like the NFL isn't wanting to make the defense a part of a game anymore, which I absolutely don't want. I hate it. I think teams should have to play defense. I think the NFL should at least be promoting teams making stops, because the way I look at overtime and the previous rule, the rule where a touchdown ended it, the sudden death part of it really does make sense, because if you hold a team to a field goal, that made no sense to end the game, because holding a team to a field goal, I don't care what generation we're talking about, holding a team to a field goal, I feel like is a win in anybody's mind, any defensive mind. That is a win. You hold a team to a field goal, that gives your team a chance to make this game stay close, because you give up 3 in a big situation that hey, all I have to do is get a field goal here and the game is still close. Whereas you give up a touchdown, that's a lot of pressure to try to come back from, especially in big moments. So I think we all know that the rule of ending it on a field goal, the other team still gets a chance, that one makes sense. But when it comes to a touchdown and stopping it, that's when things, in my opinion, get a little bit different. Because if you're giving up touchdowns, that obviously means your defense wasn't good enough to stop them. And there's also a point for me personally, and this is just me, as I've had years to think about this. Since that AFC Championship game loss to the Patriots, I've had years to think about this rule. And it kind of been, blown up because of the Chiefs and Bills game. You kind of have it to where, because a game does go to overtime, that means your team itself, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really, in my opinion, matter the scenario and how you got it there. there are reasons to why this game is going to go to overtime for both teams. You can always look back at a game and be like, hey, that is the reason why this game went to overtime. You shouldn't have, given up a 28-3 lead. Or for Buffalo's sake, you shouldn't have let the Chiefs score a field goal in 13 seconds. There is all these things that you look back at a game and you've had multiple chances to win. Now, these are all my opinions. If you disagree, I can completely understand, because on an on-field product, obviously I feel like these games are going to be much more exciting now because you have Mahomes and Josh Allen going back and forth even in overtime. So I think it's going to be it's going to make games more exciting. I'm not going to deny that, but I also don't like the fact that they're completely eliminating a part of a game. And I do like the sudden death aspect of a game. It makes coaches coach the game a little bit differently. It makes the players play the game a little bit differently. So that's just from a strategy point. Now, when it comes to a health standpoint, it's kind of crazy that the NFL did this, because not only are they extending the overtimes in the postseason, they've also added the 17th game this past season. Now they have 18 weeks of football with all the practice and stuff. So the players are going to be in a lot of pain, and it's going to be more hits on the players than I think they really want to take. I understand it's a sport. They sign up to it. They want to win the game. That's the whole point of a football game, is to win. But man, these players are going to take a beating. And because this leads me into my next point, and I think it's kind of a point that I don't hear many people talking about. What happens if we have another Chargers-Raiders situation? Now, obviously, that game is a little bit different because that game could have ended in a tie and both teams got in. But let's say that the only way to make the playoffs, the only way to get in, is a win. And let's say that game goes into overtime. And let's say that the Chargers were to score on their opening possession in Week 18 in a win and get in situation, and the Raiders never touch the football. That's why I think that this is a point that I'm not really seeing people talk about, because if you think about it, the NFL and the way they've set up Week 18s now, the final week of the season, what used to be Week 17, is they set up the final games with the most playoff implications. And then the Sunday Night Football game is like the biggest, most important playoff scenario situations. They put that game on last. And what happens if in Week 18, we get another situation where the teams go to overtime, the first team scores, the game is over. They score a touchdown, the game is over. I feel like that's going to bring up a whole bunch of uproar. Now, obviously, that's a regular season. And in the regular season, you can look back at, 17, 18 weeks of film and be like, well, this team could have done a whole bunch of things different to get in. But it's also a fair point that I think, why would you do this rule only for the postseason when some of these games, when it comes down to Week 18, have some of the biggest implications of any game all season long? And you're kind of stripping away the one rule that you're only giving in the postseason. That's a situation I don't know if anybody's really brought up, because I don't think people would have been very happy. Because now I think now if there's a Week 18 that goes into overtime and a team scores first gets the ball first, scores a touchdown, and then the game ends, I think there's going to be a whole bunch of uproar. I really do think that because the way they have the rules set up, that it's for the regular season, it's not being changed, but for the postseason it is. I feel like there's going to be an uproar of mad fans, whichever team loses because of the way the rule is structured now, there is going to be massive uproar, which I'm not going to be a part of that uproar, because I think the rule should have stayed the way it was before. But I completely understand the uproar if you're going to do it in the postseason, but you're not going to do it in the regular season, especially when a Week 18 game has a whole bunch of implications. That's something I don't think that the NFL really thought about, because those games in the regular season, now that they end because of a touchdown scored by the team that gets the ball first, now that those games are going to be exacerbated by the media, by fans, because they're going to be like, oh gosh, we have this rule in the playoffs, but the regular season and games that really matter, that rule is pointless. So there's going to be some uproar in the regular season. It's inevitable. We know what's going to happen. But then this brings me to the final point that I have with this rule. And it's going to pertain obviously to the postseason scenarios. And I don't know if they thought about this one either. Because I think personally, like I said, the rule before I think was perfectly fine, because it's sudden death. You guys couldn't win the game in regulation, and obviously no one thinks a field goal should end it, but if you can't stop a team from scoring a touchdown, I don't think you honestly deserve to win that game to begin with. That's just my personal opinion. Play defense. Because, obviously we look at the Buffalo game. Buffalo had multiple chances to stop the Chiefs. Obviously the 13 seconds. Then you have the fact that they could have stopped. They had 2 drives where they just could not stop the Chiefs. So in my opinion, that's an aspect of a football team, and you couldn't stop them. Why should you get the ball back, and why should you get a chance? But then obviously with same thing with the Chiefs, they couldn't stop the Patriots. Why should they get the ball back? That's just my opinion. Look at the Falcons. They blew a 28-3 lead. They didn't get the ball back. They blew a 28-3 lead. Why should they see the football? Like, that's just my thing. Like, there's situations in a game where why should you see the football? But those are just my opinions. But let's get back to the very last point that I had, and it has to do with what if both teams score a touchdown on their opening possessions? Then what happens? I really do feel like we're back at square one, and that it's going to bring a whole bunch of outrage. Now, I could be looking too far into this, and this scenario may be far-fetched, and who knows, this scenario may only happen once in the next 5 or 10 years. But I think that's going to be an important thing, because when it does come up, I think it's going to cause outrage. And I really do think people are going to be really upset when it does happen, because say the Buffalo and Kansas City game, we know that if Buffalo gets that ball back, they're scoring a touchdown. We know if Mahomes gets the ball in overtime against the Patriots, they're probably going to score. I mean, the Falcons, they probably weren't going to score because they were absolutely shut out for most of that second half. So we know that, that they probably weren't going to score a touchdown there. But look at the two main games that people are talking about. The Chiefs and the Bills in their respective games in 2018 for the Chiefs and then last year for the Bills, those teams are probably going to score and respond, and the game is just going to be tied again. And then, the Patriots in 2018 get the ball back. The Chiefs last year get the ball back. And then we're right back to square one, and the Chiefs go down, they score a field goal, because now the Chiefs, all they have to do is play for a field goal, I'm pretty sure, and then the game's over. So really, what does this rule achieve? It's just going to upset people because it's going to be a never-ending cycle. And I really do think that the rule that the NFL should have done, and if they would have done this only to the postseason, I would have been okay with. If they would have just allowed the teams to play a full 10-minute or 15-minute period in the postseason, that seemed more viable than this, because now you're going to have teams that are going to go back and forth in overtime. It's going to be the third possession, then it's sudden death, and it's like, well, why change the rule if it's just going to be sudden death again? That's just how I feel. Because, again, the last thing I'll say about this, the reason why the rule shouldn't have been changed, in my personal opinion, is because we had back-to-back weeks of the rule upsetting people and then the rule working perfectly. You look at what happened in the Chiefs-Bills game. Josh Allen didn't get the ball back. The Chiefs go down. Mahomes throws the game-winning touchdown to Travis Kelce. And then you look at the very next week, literally the next week, that nobody is willing to talk about. It feels like nobody's willing to talk about. The very next week, the Bengals, their defense in that second half was some of the best defense played in the second half of a conference championship game possibly ever. The Cincinnati Bengals showed that great defense can still win you a football game. Look what they did in the second half. They shut out the Chiefs for most of that second half. They gave up 3 points. Then you look in overtime. They did exactly what they had to do. The Chiefs won the toss, and it did not faze the Bengals, and their defense stood up, and they made a stop. So I think this rule in itself doesn't solve anything. I think it makes the situation worse. Personally, I think it makes it makes it worse, because you're not doing this rule in the regular season, because then you're going to have games in the regular season that really matter, and both teams aren't going to touch the football. Both teams are going to score in overtime in the playoffs, and then it's sudden death already when it could have just been sudden death already. So personally, I think this rule causes even more issues than before. But those are all just my personal opinions. So, based off of everything I just said, I want to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on the new overtime rule? Give me your thoughts down below, and I will see you in the next one.